It seems to me that not only can there be a philosophy of biblical criticism, but there really ought to be, and that it's long time that we have one. If we think about a number of other academic disciplines, say mathematics, physics, the sciences in general, law, history, we find for each of them there's a corresponding philosophy of kind of subdiscipline in which philosophers and philosophically minded practitioners of the discipline explore a number of important questions about the metaphysical assumptions that the discipline makes about its objects of inquiry, the nature of the world, or epistemological assumptions it makes about the extent of human knowledge within that domain, or what constitutes a good argument, what constitutes relevant and acceptable evidence. And it seems like all of these kinds of questions ought to be asked about biblical scholarship as well. But there are also a number of practical ways in which a philosophy of biblical criticism could be very useful for the day-to-day work that biblical scholars engage in. So, for example, in the last 20 years, we've seen a turn in epistemology toward a variety of social issues or practical issues. And a number of these I find quite exciting because I think they have a lot of bearing for what biblical scholars like me do. So take, for example, testimony. There's been a lot of literature produced in recent years on the epistemology of testimony. When is it that we are in a good position to accept testimony as a valid source of knowledge or as justification for belief? When is testimony defeated such that we set it aside? Can there be group testimony? And we think, well, might this apply to Scripture? Well, the biblical texts frequently claim eyewitness testimony, or they report the testimony of their authors, testifying about mundane historical matters, social matters, testifying about rather remarkable encounters, testifying about divine revelation. How should we assess these kinds of things from an epistemological point of view? And there's a lot of literature that is very helpful for getting a grasp on these things. Another discussion that has been very popular of late is that about peer disagreement. What do we do when biblical scholars who seem to be equally qualified, who are well-trained, have expertise in the relevant languages and cultures, come to very disparate conclusions about some controversial issue? Should other scholars who lack that expertise, or the layperson, simply say, well, I guess we can't know what the answer is? Should people dig in their heels and defend a view? Ought they perhaps to lessen the strength with which they hold their views on this matter? Or should they be agnostic? And I think the philosophical literature right now is exploring these questions in very exciting ways that biblical scholars could learn from, and perhaps in ways that would help us to improve our own practices.